So thank you all for coming. Last day of the conference. Did you have fun? Fun so far? Yeah, that was pretty intense, huh? So this is the a meeting, kind of an informal gathering, really, of folks to from the Libraries, Archives, and Museums Interoperability Special Interest Group. We're actually not yet an official MCN interest group. We're hoping this will happen this year. So we have an awesome group of folks to help us talk about this today, but I just wanted to start by saying, we've talked a lot about how museums have a critical role in empowering humans. I think this was the silver lining this whole week, wasn't it? To empower humans to help them understand the world around them, to engage with the world in a more informed fashion. And this is great, of course, but museums can't do it alone. So that's why we're still talking about libraries, archives, and museums. And certainly libraries and archives have an important role to play in this. So I've invited a wonderful group of colleagues and to help us think about specific strategies when it comes to 4 broad topics. So the first one will be content, talking about data and images. Second one will be technology, policies, and users. And I have put their names up on the slide here, and I have on purpose not specified which departments they are coming from, because I think these artificial kind of separations are somewhere at the crux of some of this. So why don't we start by talking about content? And we haven't rehearsed, and we have more, we have an hour and 8 wonderful speakers. So yes. So you guys are going to speak about some of those 4 points, right? And there are mics on the table behind you. I think you're supposed to take that. And away we go. There hopefully will be time for questions at the end. So let's start with talking about how we can make our content a little bit more interoperable with one another. Who wants to take that one?
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, that's fine. Well, I actually had a brainstorm about this topic at this conference. There's a lot of talk about linked data, which I think we assume inherently is going to be interoperable. The promise of being able to link to each other. We probably are several years out from producing linked data, but I feel like in order to orient ourselves in that direction, one of the things we can do is start working on structured data in our systems of record. And I guess my strategy is to try to find preparatory work that I can do that might help us position ourselves, even if we can't reach the milestone we want to reach. I'm scrappy enough in a smaller to mid-size, smaller museum to try to find, honestly, free preparatory things that we can do that will position us. And for us right now, that's structured data, and we're trying to break our long narrative text blocks around our collection objects down into more structured entries, and we're also trying to match terms to standard vocabularies, whatever they may be. And we've been doing some work just matching stuff with SQL queries to standard vocabularies and then importing the terms back into our database. So, we're looking at structure instead of linking.
And I think, when I think about how the museum data and library data and archive data needs to work together, what I think about is that what we need to find are those places where we overlap, those intersections between our fields. Because, I've got paintings, and the librarians have books, and the archivists have manuscripts or letters or postcards or coffee napkins. But we have intersections between these things, and my paintings and her books, there are links there, but they're not explicit. They're linked through scholarly research, they're linked through people, they're linked through shared places and time. And so we're not going to expose our core sources because those are the things that don't interoperate. But we are going to connect through the other parts of our experience that are so important.
And I would add to that it's a flexibility and understanding that everyone's content comes from a different place. So the content that's important to an archivist is more of a meta level. You're creating finding aids, you're creating metadata for whole collections, hundreds of thousands of pieces, whereas a museum person is coming at it from the single object. And so it's where do you come together in the middle? And librarians have kind of an in-between, but they still lean toward that individual object, of course, because you have to catalog a book and put it in. But then Library of Congress used to be the gold standard for cataloging, so everybody would copy catalog Library of Congress when possible, but it didn't actually go all the way to a museum level where you're adding in, you had special collections which would add in provenance data, the book binders, things that were very unique and special from a museum side, and maybe it started to feel more like an archival meta type of description because people were just quickly passing it through. So I think it's kind of understanding the differences in people's approaches to find the sweet spots where we can at least come together and recognizing that everybody's standard is there for a reason, but bringing our conversations, coming together to actually, it's probably the common theme throughout everything. Let's talk to each other.
One of the most interesting things for me is the simple fact that each one of these different entities tends to describe things in a different way. So if you're talking about a museum object, often descriptions give you more of a hint of its content, whereas when you're talking about libraries or archives, we tend to describe the object itself. And so just to go to David's point, so how do you find those areas where they interact and overlap when you're dealing with descriptions that are only talking about the objects? So if you have a letter from an artist that is related to a painting in another collection, how do you find that overlap if you don't actually have metadata concerning the content of that letter?
So then to continue on that theme, starting small and demonstrating the value of doing this seems to be a good approach that we've taken internally at the Getty. So for example, Brenda and Daniel, sitting at the front, wave, integrated as sort of in an experimental way the provenance index from the GRI with the museum data for only 10 objects, 12 objects, yeah. Just so that in the museum collection page, you could then link through to get to the description of the provenance in the provenance index. And then doing that, just at a very minimal level, by hand, demonstrate some of the things that if we did have better data, to go back to Kate's point, if it was structured in a way that was easy to do more automatically, then we'd begin to sort of get that snowball rolling down the hill towards getting better linked data, because we've demonstrated the value of linked data to the end users, to the people who actually need to interact with these things and do research and understand what they're looking at.
I'll just quickly piggyback on that, and that's remembering it is producing these small results to work toward the larger goal. I'm always impressed by archivists when you walk into that room and it looks like a bomb went off and there's hundreds of thousands of pieces, and then they show you this is what we started with, and then there's the slide of the finished, beautifully cataloged and processed collection in their boxes lined up on the shelves, and they weren't afraid. They took a look at that room and they were just so excited because they're going to have to organize everything. But they have a tangible result, and it's a really great lesson to always remember when you see, the archivist managed to do it. And so I think it's that chipping away, not being afraid of just that daunting, the overwhelming task of what's in front of us.
Thank you so much for saying that.
And you're the archivist.
We're not hoarders, we swear.
Thank you. Well, I wanted to make 2 points. One is, as far as content, and this is an issue that I always like to bring up, is that often there's a problem in the archival community, and I think to a certain extent among the small museums, that there is a lack of content, that there are backlogs. So, I think one of the things that needs to be addressed before we can talk about sharing data is a way or ways that we can actually ease that backlog, like technology or new processes where we can actually create the data, which obviously is the first step. And also I just wanted to point out that I think that one of the big stumbling blocks for the LAMs has been that archivists have, and we're kind of late to the table, but we have really a need for hierarchical description. And I think that has been a problem with trying to look at interoperability, where most systems are single item, certainly in the museum world and in the library world. But just the idea that we can kind of break away from that with linked data, we can go into a multifaceted model that will still allow a representation of the hierarchy. So, obviously I think that's the answer, but it's going to be a long time coming, and maybe meanwhile we can address the backlogs too.
And I think going off of that the most important thing that we have to realize about this interoperability is we have to break each of our silos' best practices to do it. I mean, I know from a museum telling them that we're going to treat archival objects the same way we treat collections objects is this horrible thing where everyone was really, really nervous about doing that because they're different kinds of things. And archivists saying, we're going to describe the content at the item level was this, it's a break from tradition. It violates the rules of the field. But the only way we're going to get to work together is to make these little, it's not to throw away what we do, but to add to it a little bit so that we have that interoperability.
Just to add to that, I think I love this idea of describing content at the item level, but again, it comes down to scale. When you talk about museum collections, you're usually talking about thousands of objects. At my institution, we have nearly 3 million objects digitized. And that is just a very small fraction of our collections. And so, again, it comes down to technology. We need to devise a better way to describe these things at the item level before we can even think about mounting a project of that size and really accomplish what we want to in terms of interoperability.
So not to move on to technology, but one idea that's being explored at the moment in that space is the Indigenous Digital Archive, which is a collaboration of the New Mexico State Archives and various Native American museums in New Mexico in collaboration with the 25 tribes. And they have reels and reels of microfilm that they've digitized and put up using the IIIF, the International Image Interoperability Framework that was discussed in this room in the previous session, to allow both the tribes and folks that are interested to go in and annotate the images to say, this is a letter. Even just, not necessarily transcribed, not identify people, just these 3 images make up an item. Which, it's not just small archives that have this problem. We measure our backlog in linear miles in the GRI. So there's no way that, we could spend eternity trying to catalogue all of those objects. The only way that we can really engage both the community and at the same time get all of this stuff available and useful is to encourage high quality descriptions, such as via crowdsourcing, or often called expert sourcing, because it's not necessarily the wisdom of the crowds, which can be the madness of the masses. It's finding the people who are engaged, interested, and able to help.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I mean, I think that's a really good point when we talk about all this interoperability within institutions, but making sure that you remember who you're doing it for and going outside and enlisting. I mean, when you talk about scale and never getting to it all, but just making your stuff available, even if it's not perfect, and not worrying about it. So having things in place like institutionally, like open access policies, anything where you can make things available to people, because then you can leverage. You know, in the higher ed community, they have grad students, they have resources that we're just never going to approach. And if you can come up with something and it's someone's thesis, that's great. I mean, you can get a lot done that way.
And I think when we're thinking about technology for interoperability, there's this barrier, which is there's so much to do, it will never be done. But we have to think, if we think optimistically and say, maybe it will be done, I'm perfectly fine with blank fields, but that field has to exist if we're ever going to interoperate. And it's I need a place for you to put your content. I need a place for you to put that person. Because if those fields don't exist, if we don't build in the possibility of collaboration, we will never have collaboration. And I don't care if they're blank. I mean, I'm going to do something with 10 of your items, and I will fill those things in and make your data better if I need it. But I can only do that if there is a place for me to put the stuff that I need into your data.
Just to follow on that theme, and we this is sort of a segue, but we did a project a couple years ago, a planning grant, and we tried to analyze what was in our curatorial files, and it was kind of this crossover between like archives and museum objects, because there was information about both kinds of stuff in there, and the scale was really too big, and the project didn't go anywhere. But an idea from a curator actually was that the important stuff, the stuff that's really valuable, like if we just digitize everything and put it out there, we live in a digital culture of favorites. If you give people a way to tag stuff with a heart or to favorite it, it will eventually emerge to the top of your vast million document collection, and you will have identified what has the richest resources, maybe what you want to go back and apply, in-depth cataloging to. I mean, the other part of this is that for interoperability, it's like what we learned from this project, what's so important to curators and researchers, is the serendipitous find. So they don't necessarily care that they might be missing a couple pieces of information that maybe get lost from a paper file, or like, let's say I'm searching on the internet. I'm not really upset with the search results I'm missing. What I'm wanting to work with, I'm gonna take what I can get and I'm gonna run with it. It's the serendipitous find. If I find 10 things, maybe I didn't get 3 matches, but that research is organic like that, and we can interoperate without having 100% field-to-field matches across all our collections. Like, even if we just broad search on artist name, people that are researching, they will take what we can provide them back, weed out the junk, just like you do when you're searching for high tops. I think it's like we kind of have to loosen up about how strict we're interoperating, and technology can help us do that.
And kind of to piggyback on that, I would love to see more digital projects aimed at non-item level, where archivists are going in and they're just digitizing an entire series of records and then doing the description the way that we normally do. We describe at a series level. And then, your idea about having that rise to the surface, based on user need, and then do additional catalog, I think that would be a perfect kind of blending and of what is considered like digital curation and digital archiving.
And there are a lot of archives implementing exactly that. I mean, you have University of Princeton and also Yale who are doing exactly that, but not necessarily on the series level, they're doing it on the folder level. And one of the problems they've kind of been encountering is this issue of, okay, how are we going to make all of this searchable now? How are we going to OCR these documents? What are our workflows going to look like? So I agree. I think the more we can kind of look at our standards and our description standards and try to blend them and not necessarily fight them, the better off we'll be. But again, it's kind of working out these hiccups in our workflows and being more efficient with it.
So to go back to the very first statement from Kate, so mad props to the Walters, because in their data, they have all of their materials statements indexed with controlled access fields. So there's pencil on canvas, and there's a notion of pencil, or graphite, in fact, and there's a notion of canvas. And that's the sort of thing, you know, the structured data, not necessarily fully linked and magic, you know, unicorns with rainbows data, but just structured and machine understandable, to say this has a material and that material is graphite, or the visual support is paper. So if we can agree on those sorts of common terminologies, and you know, it'll be different for libraries that'll tend towards Library of Congress headings, and museums will probably tend towards AAT and similar. But there's enough overlap, and there's enough people out there who are interested in getting all of these things to be mutually understandable that it will solve itself. Right? It's a case of, you know, LCSH blah 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 is the same as AAT blah blah blah. That can be done automatically. All of a sudden, things start to align, and we get that rich interoperability between a book that is talking about the drawing and the drawing itself. So yes, a call, please, if you are building such, you know, free text fields such as material statements, also think about what the individual components are, particularly for decorative arts, right? Oak veneered with tulip wood, ... for several paragraphs. That's great for a human, but if you're looking for tulip wood and you call it something different, then it's going to be really hard to find. So yeah, please do think about the terminology that you're using for those descriptions.
Can we talk about local terminology for a minute? How does that fit in?
We have banned local terminology. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, and in response to what Rob said, I mean, that we do, and we have to thank Chad Patrivet for doing structured cataloging very early on in TMS for us when he was at our museum, but, so I won't take credit for that work, but it's also only like 30% of our collection that has these materials tagged out. I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's, you know, we try to find ways to cheat and do like term-to-term matches and then just import the vocabulary terms. That works great for another 30%, but it's not the entire collection by any means. You know, because so we actually have we have a few limited categories. We catalog materials, support, color, gender. We found that our local vocabularies it was just legacy data that was not, it was really just complicating things. We converted local terms, we just mapped them to standard vocabularies, and we do have some strange, unmappable, mostly like foreign language, like Asian armor, sword parts that have names that aren't really in a standard vocabulary, but We really just discarded them. They never got us anywhere when we started structuring stuff out.
And I think this, when I think about about this local terminology, I think about someone this week used the phrase, our local heroes. I think we were talking about people, but it is that idea that each of us, every one of our domains, we are an expert in something, and nobody else is going to know it as well as we do, which means we have to take ownership of that. And maybe, in my provenance work, it's the donor community of Pittsburgh as people. They're not in the library, they're not in the archive. This is the only, we care about them, but we're the only people who care about them in this context. But that doesn't mean we should try to capture every person who goes through our system. We should not be the expert on Monet. We should not be the expert on Van Gogh, because we don't have to be. And the same thing for terminology. I don't need to catalog graphite. I don't need to catalog oil paint. But if we have a deep expertise in, say, Asian gemstones, and maybe we should be the authority of that, and we should get together with the other people who care about a little thing and make our local vocabulary. Because the Getty has done amazing work with AAT and ULAN, but they are never going to catalog everything that everybody cares about in their domain. And so we can't find that authority because the things are too big. But being able to say, here's an authority for 80%, and then we're going to be the authority for that 5% that nobody else cares about as much as we do. I think about the Autry, which has this amazing collection of Native American art and a really nice set of names for the tribes that the art depicts. And maybe they have to be the expert in that. And I can use their expertise. And that's where this interoperability comes.
I would make a plug for adding your local expertise to the authorities, the national authorities. So add your names to AAT. Go in, make a plea for Library of Congress to update their authority files. They no longer update them. So you can't rely on it. It's a starting point, but we don't necessarily have to keep it local. We can develop it and then contribute it back out to the larger community.
So I'm going to contradict myself. So yes, please do. Joan Cobb would kill me if I didn't instantly agree. Please do contribute any terms that you have that are not in the Getty vocabularies. We'd very much love to have them. That said, in the world of the World Wide Web, where everything is essentially local, the Getty vocabularies and the Library of Congress subject headings and other taxonomies are local, right? The way that the web and linked data works is that the more use, the more available, the more useful something is, the more use it gets, the more trust it gains, and the more use it gets and the more trust it gains, which is why Wikipedia, although a amorphous, constantly changing set of documents about anything under the sun that people want to talk about, has so much, relatively speaking, trust that it pushed, Encyclopedia Britannica, who had them, who still has an encyclopedia on their shelf? No one? Yep. It's pushed that space totally into this distributed, decentralized mode. So, in terms of local authorities, yes, we can surely accept some artists into ULAN, some terms into AAT, but there's no better person to maintain the information about those terms than the organizations that care deeply about them. And it's not that the Getty doesn't care deeply about them, it's just that we have a large data set already. So if you want to have rich information about those people, places, things, concepts, work with us so that we can help those descriptions be discoverable, so that if you come to AAT, you do a search, and we know that you have good information about it, we can push the user to the local, but really online, authority system that has the best information about it. The reason that we have national authority files is pre-web, where you didn't have instant online access to computers and systems all around the world. Right? You had to have something where you could look up in big books, okay, it's this term, and it's this number that goes with it. So we don't, while it's still important, it's not the be-all and end-all. So now I'll take my web hat off.
And I'll just piggyback on that to say thank you. But I think it's when you're starting a conversation somewhere where linked open data isn't anywhere in the conversation, and that's a terrifying thought to very conservative, senior management, that at least you have the starting point of getting people to talk about those pre-web authorities that you can then become part of the conversation because you've brought people to the table and you're having people create that content. And now it's almost like the very, very first inch forward, baby step from coming from from the museum side. And you also have traditional, I'm also on the library side. I'm not gonna say what department I'm in, right? But you also have built-in infrastructures on library side, that archive side, all of our sides. But I do think that they still serve a very important role to help us take the first baby step forward.
Yeah, I just want to quickly follow up on that, because I think I probably was a little too harsh on the local vocabularies. I mean, because I think if you look at, a lot of people at this conference have talked about like design thinking, and it's kind of like, it's a great place to apply design thinking to your own data workflows. I mean, local vocabularies, building them can be a great exercise to get people used to creating, to standardizing things. But I guess I just see it as deferred maintenance, because eventually you're going to want to match up with something that's more interoperable. So.
I would just add to that, I mean, when you present this institutionally, just saying, telling a cataloger, no, you can't use these terms, you have to use these, is probably not going to fly. So it's all yes and. It's, you can do that, but we're also going to show you this. And I found it very helpful to just demonstrate. I mean, you're talking about the web, but just doing very straightforward searches for things and say, this is why you want your content described. Or if you're working on a project, show them the analytics and say, you're not showing up in the search for what you want, so this is why you should be using these terms. And that's where well-described data. But I also think that technology has changed so much that a lot of these like local things, the synonym mapping and taxonomies is great. So we're getting a lot further along.
And I think the thing that brings this entire community together is that we all end up having to be the authority on something. The archives are the authority on their archival content. The museums are the authority on their objects. The libraries are the authority on their books. And we all have unique things that we own and are responsible for being the authority to the world for. And I think we should, and we can extend that out into other things that we need to be the authority for. And we should be really nervous about doing that, because it's work that we have to do and we have to promise to maintain. And this is where things like ULAN are great. The way I tell my teams about it are, we're doing this because otherwise you have to maintain all the information about Monet yourself. And that's work that you have to do and you're promising to do well. And wouldn't you rather have let somebody else do that work so you can focus on the thing that we actually care about, which is our Monet painting?
All right, should we switch a little bit and talk about strategies? How do we...
Were there any questions from or comments from the audience first before we change topics totally?
I was just curious if any of you had been thinking about applications for machine learning and some of the issues that you raised, specifically I think around, I think a lot about archival collections and just the scale and the problem, and it seems to me a real opportunity, and kind of circling back to some of these things people have been saying about crowdsourcing. We could have machines do some crowdsourcing really, and how does that, I've primarily thought about that in the context of aggregation, but it seems like there may be other types of interoperability questions and I'm just curious if anyone has thought about that all in this context.
Well, I know we said human-centered museum, but I'm hoping our next year will be machines. I just think that's what's amazing right now, all this stuff. I'm just like obsessed with like Facebook AI and the stuff they're doing with image recognition and all that. I think that's really gonna have to come into the conversation for us for sure.
And I think the place where machine learning is going to be most useful, I think about it a lot in the sort of machine learning augmented human work, because about 95%, I watch archivists and I watch my registrars work, and they do amazing amounts of really, really boring work. And I am shocked at how thorough and they are. I mean, that is something I can't do. But if I can think about machine learning as a way to do the 90% of their work that is boring and let them do the 10% that needs human expertise, that's where I think it's really powerful. Because I know in our museum, we would never let a robot describe an artwork because that gives up our authority and it puts our reputation at risk. But if I can take it from you have to look at all of this text and read it to here are words, are they relevant, yes or no? All of a sudden I've made the curator's job easier and the part of their job that is actually interesting and relevant. And that's where I think machine learning is going to be really useful in our field.
And I'm not sure if this really counts as machine learning, but I also, let's talk about imaging. Imaging has been so greatly improved by, it's probably not machine learning, but when we were doing this curatorial files project, one of the things we discovered was this Digital Transitions has this like archival capture copy stand, and they have software that will actually automatically straighten the pages on your copy stand. So, we did some pilots with digitizing page by page, and we did some dumb tests around copy stand, and it's like, it's never straight. How we spend all this time straightening. And for them to present us, oh, this software automatically straightens your pages, that just saved us like 2 years. The scale that they were demonstrating they could digitize all types of flat materials was like mind-blowing. So, the imaging doesn't really require any subject matter expertise, except for responsible image creation and stuff, digital preservation stuff. But that design thinking idea, like, let the machines do the stuff that doesn't have words involved, or
So,
put the
I know
robots.
we're not supposed to say where we're from, but
Yeah.
I'm on the imaging side. So I will say that having subject matter expertise is vital in imaging projects. So knowing what the objects are and having experience. But I do agree that I think that automation will help and technology can help improve. And like you were saying, it's an assistive process. So the things that are tedious, straightening and cropping and all of that. But I would say for all these imaging projects, having a photographer who understands it, you're going to get much higher quality results.
And I don't know which of you are technologists and which of you are subject matter people, but if you are a technologist, go and sit next to a registrar for an hour and watch what they're doing, because you can solve their problems in 30 minutes. And the problem that I have as a technologist is I don't know the hard work that you are doing that I could make easier. And it goes the other way too. The content people should go and talk to the technologists and describe what they're doing. And it's that sharing of ideas that because what I've learned is that I can do something in an hour that will save you 3 months of work, and you are willing to do the 3 months of work, but if I can save you from that, you can put that energy into something that I can't solve.
Sure. So to continue that thought, it's not that machine learning, including sort of image analysis, text mining, and automatic classification, they don't replace curators, they don't replace scholars, they might replace the curator's assistant that goes and looks up things for them. Or the RA for the scholar who goes to the library and does a bunch of background research and finds books that could be relevant, takes them back to the scholar and says, here you go, here is what I found. So in order to do that, however, we need to have the machine needs to have some knowledge of what is correct, right? It's machine learning because you learn from this maps to that. This is the correct answer for this problem case. This is the correct answer for this case. So one of the things that we can do, to go back to Kate's data, for example, if we wanted to build some natural language processing tool that parsed existing material statements, and we had a bunch of good data that's been done by hand as a gold standard to learn from, then that makes that a tractable problem, as opposed to an impossible problem. Right? If there is no mapping from graphite or pencil to the controlled vocabulary term, then there's no way a machine can learn what to do. So one of the things that we as a community could do is decide which of the problems that we have, it's tractable to a machine if we could build together that gold standard training set. Right? If it's a day of work across 20 museums to build a sufficiently rich data set that we could do some interesting machine learning on, that seems like a pretty achievable goal.
I would agree with that, and I think another kind of aspect to it would also be like some kind of shared technology for actually reviewing and doing some of the work around the kind of that kind of 10% you're talking about, because that's something that we find that we're lacking is, okay, we're thinking about the training set and we're thinking about the data, but then if we want to involve real people in the review of that, there's not something kind of, just plug and play along that line. So I think it's maybe the two sides of that, but that's really provocative.
And I just wanted to add, when I talk about the difference between like bibliographic description and traditional archival finding aids, I use an example, excuse me, of a joint committee and show a bibliographic record from WorldCat, where the parent organizations are listed as subjects. So you have that information that there's some connection there. But then when you look at the archival finding aid, someone has sat down and like researched and written, and like when the parent organization actually formed this joint committee and so forth. Then you look at the linked data version and WorldCat, and here they say that there is this association. It's just pulling from the data, but it's a good example of where a little human augmentation could help, where to make that relationship clearer without having to do so much like actual narration, I guess, of it. So yes, just to make the point that we do want to rely on technology, and yet it's not something that we can just rely on 100%. I mean, there is going to have to be the tweaking and the oversight.
All right, so,
I just wanted to say one thing that I think is very interesting about the work you all are talking about, and kind of a dividend down the road for doing the work of interoperability, is these things can really build on top of each other in ways that we might not even really be able to anticipate right now. So like Rob, you were talking about, okay, we have text fields of description, it's human readable, a machine could make it more machine readable, that then enables more automatic connection between collections and different museums entirely, that could then enable a person to kind of stand on top of that and make all sorts of connections that would otherwise have never, it could have taken years of research, and now like, ooh, these things are like kind of assembling in front of your eyes, and you can use that to make all kinds of interesting stuff. So again, it gets back to human-centric, but I think it could really accelerate the process, and it could really transform a lot of aspects of our field in the not too distant future, right?
all right, so moving on, we have 15 minutes left, and moving on to the section about policies, I guess. We talked a lot about open access this week, and we've been here, and I wonder, it seems to me there are some obvious policies such as, yes, open access, that would be useful, but how do we bring those discussions in the institution to help with the problem we're looking at today? Are there strategies to foster those conversations?
I can say one thing which is interesting about open access, and again, it's been a topic here, but it's kind of it's sort of not really debatable at this point. It's been so successful that institutions have adopted it, right? But I think that where we're struggling now is like, how do you grow it and where does it expand? So I think archives and museum collections are different than the archives are different than the museum collections, and so getting that content accessible. And it's something that we've really struggled. I don't have an answer. I mean, we want to get that material out there, but it's an institutional policy. It's a conversation you have to have with the senior leadership and just say, hey, we did it for this and it was good. But being positive and just being proactive and just continuing to bang that drum, so to speak, throughout the institution.
Philadelphia has a mandate from the director to talk through fair use and to start to change the culture and the policy of actually using it really in our workflows, not having curatorial assistants just go ahead and sign that contract because they're so desperate to get that image from that lender, and then it just locked down all of our uses across the rest of the institution. We are about halfway through. What we've done is working with general counsel. We have made a grid based on we folded in lately the most recent version of AAMD, but it's been very interesting because the director is thinking about it in the terms of CAA's Code for Fair Use. So I'm also now in the process of talking through, it's not just fair use of pictures, it's data, it's open access, and it's been fascinating to see staff, I'm on the library and archive side, of course we give our data away. Of course that's not a problem. Of course IT is putting their data in GitHub, and of course, go, people, use, reuse, and it's been fascinating to see how uncomfortable people are. Yes. But it's not, we're just in the process. It's a big, long conversation. But it comes from the top. So when we do get stuck in the tracks, we are able to circle back around to the director to kind of gently help him, ask him to nudge us forward a bit. It'll get there. It'll hopefully be an actual action. Open access policy, I would say reach out to the people that are resources at this conference to help advocate on your behalf. People that do open access proselytize. Librarians, we're out there. Don't be afraid to ask the presenters to come in as a consultant. They'll probably do it for free because we want to get, you're gonna, Peter Yazzie was just here. If you need help from a lawyer, everybody has a point of view. And so if your counsel is leaning toward the conservative side, it's like, just because he happens, I'm not saying I'm picking on my counsel, but just because he's a good guy. Just because, X person in your institution comes up with their point of view on it, you go to the doctor, somebody gives you a diagnosis or a course of action, you say, oh, okay, well, let me talk to 2 or 3 other doctors. It's the same thing. You can always find somebody to support your cause, and this is a great resource to leverage people to support your cause. But it has to come from the top. But you also have to, it's the same story. Make connections, talk to people. If your top doesn't want to do it, okay, then become friends with the registrar, or become friends with whomever it is that posts the data. Say, maybe just start gently putting things out. Ask for forgiveness. These are the same things we say over and over, but I think that we keep saying them because they hold true. And, smile, nod, and be nice. Be nice to each other. Be nice,
I think you're exactly right. At my organization, we're in a similar situation where we have this mandate from above, open access, go for it. But there's this kind of resistance among the staff, and I think it comes down to a lack of education and understanding. So yes, invite people to come to your organization and explain in simple, clear terms what fair use is, because I feel like there's a lot of misconception out there about what fair use is, what it can do for us, why we have it. There's also a lot of confusion about what copyright is, how intellectual properties work, what is a right of publicity, what does that even mean? So what does confidentiality mean? So I think, again, it comes back to education. Invite people in, have them explain in simple terms what all of this means. I think it really does help. It goes a long way.
And I just will expand on that and say, one of the things that we learned in trying to formalize our policy is that we had the biggest group ever around the table. I was really surprised to comprehend that our rights policies affect people in the museum that I never work with. I mean, we're talking like, and it occurred to me, our whole staff is oriented around our collection, whether you're working in the cafe or the gift shop, or you're working on the website, or you're in legal. We're all oriented around the collection, so of course, rights around the data and images of the collection, you need every single person around that table to some capacity, which was our biggest challenge, because when you have a meeting with, 15, 20 people in it, those tend to get a little unwieldy. So for us, trying to find ways to get the registrar to align with, our museum store buyer who is reproducing stuff, who to align with the conservator who's sending images out, or the publications department. I mean, you're gonna at some point need to work through every level of your institution, and it takes a really long time.
And when we're talking about open access and releasing data to the world, one thing that I've learned that's really, really important to think through is the difference between putting legal restrictions on what people can do with that and putting sort of cultural restrictions but not legal ones. And this is sort of the difference between, if you release it into the public domain and ask for attribution, I don't have to go to my council and explain to them the restrictions that we're putting on the projects that I'm doing with your data. If you say, you could do anything you want and credit me, I will absolutely credit you. But it's really important to think through that every restriction that you add to your data, even as little as like CC by attribution, which seems, harmless. If there's a legal restriction, that means I now need to go and talk to a lawyer about it, which means I will not use your data because that means it's going to take me 3 weeks and I'm not going to do it. And so thinking about that is really important.
And to follow on from that, keep in mind also the distinction between a license that says, we have this under copyright, it is ours, and we are permitting you to do something. So Creative Commons URIs and definitions are licenses to do things. You are granting permission to someone to do something. As opposed to, Mark knows where I'm going next, right statements, and the equivalent for Creative Commons is rightsstatements.org. There's about 12 different sort of flags that say, this is a description of the rights that are held on this resource, on this object. So you can say, for example, this is under copyright, and we know that it is end of. Or, we looked into it, and we couldn't determine who the copyright holder was. Or, we haven't done any of that, and we have no idea what the copyright status of this thing is. So we're just going to hope for the best and hope no one sues us. So, yeah, having that distinction between known copyright with a license to do stuff, which is essentially what David was talking about, versus describing the rights status of the object is also really important to keep in mind.
Is anyone using rights statement now? Almost, yeah.
Just to add to that kind of plug for rightstatement.org, I think that's a fantastic example of collaboration between these different sectors. It really is pretty fantastic. It was developed by DPLA, so you have librarians involved, archivists are completely behind it, and you also have people in the museum sector who are interested. So I think, just want to push that forward. That's a fantastic example of one way that we are collaborating.
And not to be too self-promotional, but we do have a session about rightstatements.org at 3 o'clock, and I would love to hear from the museum world what we've got wrong or what we haven't thought about, because while we, as cultural heritage aggregators, we did get a lot of feedback that there was not a whole lot of participation early in the process by the museum community. So please let us know what we're missing. Because you will have a technologist, a librarian who is now an administrator at DPLA, and a lawyer in the room. So the perfect group of people to hear your critique about why it doesn't work. So, sorry.
I just wanted to add, if you're working on developing a more formal or straightforward rights policy at your organization. One thing our senior management really responded to was finding examples. We found collections that were similar to ours who had well-formed rights statements defined on their websites, and showing those as examples and even repurposing some of the language. Our colleagues didn't mind, and I think our senior management felt a lot more comfortable, kind of the birds of the feather model, where if we're using similar language, then hey, we're just going in the mainstream, or you can just reuse what the community is using. That helped us a lot, and it took the burden off of the legal counsel to approve every. I don't know what that mentality is, if it's like the evidence mentality, but
I will say that is part of where we're working through right now, but I would say use it. Power is knowledge, of course. Knowledge is power. What is the statement? You have to know what all of your colleagues are doing, and that is something that my people are asking for, but it's an interesting twist on that, where they're looking for the ones that are most restrictive. And so exactly. So I am planning on skipping those, but you have to know about them so you can defend yourself. But to say Rijksmuseum does it, everybody's like, well, at least, in this U.S. context, oh, well, they're over there, and, that's, well, who's in the U.S.? So it becomes this self-selecting, they only want the answer for the ones that reflect where they want to go. So thank you, National Gallery, a big institution. Thank you, Yale. I have said Yale Center for British Art, and actually all of Yale, oh, well, they've got lots of money. Be prepared. And you have to know what the community is doing, but also, push forward the ones that will give you the best case up front, and then work from there.
Well, we have 2 minutes left, so now if you've got a burning question, that would be the time.
And just as one last policy thing that would be really good for interoperability between our groups, if you're in a library, look to see how you can give your museum colleagues access to your library. If you're in a library, look to see how you can give your archivist friends access to it. It's frustrating when you have these resources that you can't get access to across the domains, and we're never going to interoperate if I can't go into your archive and talk to you.
I'll just speak loudly. How do we get university students, university departments on board with marking, like helping us mark our data, and on board with data science in general?
You pay them.
Practicums, internships if you don't have money to pay them, which is ideal, course credit, they can work for you for a semester or quarter to get credit.
Go to other conferences like VRA, places like that, anything digital humanities, and just talk to people, because I've learned so much from doing that and just going out into that world. And just as I'm also an adjunct lecturer, just talking to my art historian peer. I'm not an art historian, but just talking to my peers. It's great. Just what are their problems? Helps a lot.
And reach out to your local university and let them know what your content is and help them to use it in their courses. We have a program with UCLA, which is just across the 405, where, especially in the GRI, the library, that there is folks that teach classes at UCLA using the Getty content. But, if you don't have the opportunity to have that sort of professional extension, then at least help the people who are teaching the courses to use the content that then the students can go and see.
Exactly. Contact the faculty. We at Carnegie Mellon, at least, we have faculty who are desperate for data sets. They want you guys to contact them, and they're interested in using the materials in their classrooms for their students. They will be willing to make a course out of it. They will be willing to make a project out of it. So yes, reach out to the faculty. Please, please, please do that.
Something that we've been looking at our museum is offering people opportunities for capstone projects and senior theses.
Yeah.
All right, so I want to be mindful of the time. It is 12:30. I want to thank our panel again for sharing their wisdom with us. That was fantastic.
Thank you, Emmanuelle, for putting this together and for inviting all of us.